All right, so thank you to everybody who is joining in today. My name is Marie Cox. I am the Associate Program Manager for Commute66, which is an initiative of the Destination Sales and Marketing Group in collaboration with Arlington County and the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. And so Commute66 provides complimentary commuter program consulting services that help businesses and properties respond to, as well as really be a part of, the regional transformation that's happening as a result of the Transform 66 inside the Beltway program. And so over the past few years, I have really had the pleasure of working with many different companies, some of you who are in attendance today, to implement, promote, or enhance commuter programs, amenities, and benefits that would support those who telework, commute by transit, van pool, carpool, or biking, and that helps us move more people throughout the corridor, improve efficiencies across our region, and really ultimately commute to work in less time. And so today, we'll be discussing what commuting looks like right now and what it could look like moving forward, as well as measures that are being taken by regional service providers for commuters, the state of transit and projects along I-66, and how you can incorporate the commute in your planning, communications, and the execution of your return to the office. And so just a few housekeeping items that I wanted to touch on and important things to note before we go ahead and get started here. So this webinar is customized for companies who are located in Northern Virginia inside the Beltway. If you're not in that group, or if you're just an individual looking for some resources and options, you'll still get plenty of information today. But some of the items you might notice could be slightly tailored to this audience, and especially as we get later into the presentation, more specifically for businesses. And this webinar is being recorded and it will be posted on our website. The slides are available for download and you should see them off to the side of your screen depending on your format in the handout section. There will be time for questions at the end of this webinar. Feel free to post them in the questions feature, and I will try to circle around to them as much as possible throughout the presentation, but then also again reach back out for them at the end. And last but not least, I am coming to you live from my home/office in DC. And so I do live in a studio apartment and I do live with pets, and there is construction going on around me. So if you do hear outside noises, I apologize in advance. I'm sure that it may be something that you're used to by now, depending on how many Zoom calls you've participated in. But again, really appreciate your understanding. And if anything happens where you cannot hear me at all, please let me know using the questions feature, and I can adjust some things accordingly on my end. So to set the stage a little bit for what's going on across the region with commuting, we'll talk a little bit about what it was like before coronavirus, what commuting is like now, and what it could look like in the future. And so just before coronavirus hit, the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission released a report that shows that I-66 inside the Beltway moved nearly 60,000 people in 27,000 vehicles during rush hour. And so this also showed that 65% of these commutes were being made by transit, carpool, or van pool. A lot of times here we fall victim to the fallacy that everyone drives because that's what we see on our roads, and in our parking garage is all of the cars. We don't see the person walking into the building who just got off of the bus, or the bike commuter who's on a nearby trail, or the teleworker who's getting their second cup of coffee for the day. And when we just see the number of cars on the road, we leave out the 65% majority of people. And so as we have all experienced, COVID-19 has largely disrupted many areas of our day-to-day lives, and that includes what we've typically considered as the commute, since companies have largely transitioned to remote work. In a survey that was conducted by our sister program, Arlington Transportation Partners, in April, almost 90% of employers had transitioned more than 3/4 of their staff to telework, and 60% of employers had moved everybody to remote work. And as a result, we've experienced incredible decreases on transit ridership across our region and less traffic on our regional toll roads like I-66. And as you can see in this comparison between tolls in February and in August, Demand for the toll road right now is low, and less congestion does mean lower tolls, which is great right now, but may begin to pose problems if more companies return and traffic ticks back up, and we start to see its impacts near our work sites or through more crowding in our garages or through $35 tolls. And so what will all of this look like when we start returning to the office? So one study from IBM shows that nearly 50% of commuters who used transit before the pandemic will decrease or stop transit usage. However, at the same time, 30% of people may not purchase a vehicle due to financial constraints. And I want to talk about this one for a minute as someone who unexpectedly lost their vehicle in the midst of the last recession while living in a small town before BIKESHARE and Uber existed. While someone may be employed by your company, we know right now that there are many family concerns that may limit their access to a vehicle. The 2019 State of the Commute data shows that prior to the pandemic, 30% of DC residents and 13% of Arlington residents did not have a household vehicle. Additionally, Black households are less likely to own a car than any other race or ethnicity. And I want to point this out because I've heard companies say, well, we can just ask for people to drive to work, or we're just going to give everybody free parking. But if your return isn't set up to help the most vulnerable populations of your workforce, then who are you helping? And as for telework, 54% of employees would like this to be their primary way of working, which is probably one of the more studied areas and something that I've seen a lot of results for. And this is, to be honest, one of the more conservative estimates that I've seen. And so moving forward, telework is going to be an even more expected benefit than it has become over the past few years. And so all of this to say, and to be honest, really, if you take one thing from today, this is what matters, is that how companies return to the office is going to influence what the future of commuting looks like. If we say everyone can drive and we're giving you free parking, but not looking at anything else, this is what we'll get. Because once those decisions are made, making changes later is even more difficult and more costly. But if we share options and we help people choose something they feel most comfortable and most supported with, and if we look critically at our programs and evaluate how they're working for everyone, and if we as companies recognize our role as influencers, we could have something that looks a little bit more like this, and hopefully without the orange cones. And so here's what you can do to help prepare your organization and your employees for the eventual and gradual transition back to the office. Understand the measures that are being taken on all modes, stay up to date on regional projects and the service levels and evaluate their impacts, and incorporate the commute in every level of your return planning. And so we'll start to go through these elements now. So we'll start off with what regional service providers are doing to support commuters and keep your employees safe. So on METRORAIL and in METRORAIL stations, customers are required to wear face masks. WMATA has enhanced cleaning of all of their trains and all of the stations, and you may see staff cleaning if you're starting to go back to your commute. The cleaning that's being done ranges from wiping things down with strong disinfectants to fogging the trains daily. As far as social distancing goes, first and last rail cars, which were previously closed to create distance between commuters and the operator, have reopened, and this is to improve distancing across the trains. And so a couple of other things that I want to point out on WMATA's social distancing measures. They're really looking at this from the standpoint of having service ready to go before people start to commute back into the office. And so we'll talk about service levels and what they mean a little bit later. But that's one thing that they're really doing to try and increase social distancing and making it easier for people returning. The other thing is that right now you will see more 8-car trains in service to allow people to spread out between more train cars. And so face masks are required on all local and regional buses, and this includes, but really isn't limited to, Arlington Transit, Fairfax Connector, OmniRide, Metro Bus, and others. And all service providers have enhanced their cleaning products and disinfecting of stations and the buses. You can go to every jurisdiction's transit website, and it'll show you, talk a little bit more in detail about the efforts that they're taking with specific sanitation measures. And to improve social distancing, passengers must board using the rear doors where they're available. One thing that I want to point out with this is that the rear doors are available on most buses. They are not available on certain express buses or for some of the metro shuttles where they've contracted outside companies like coach buses and those kinds of things, where those buses just simply don't have rear doors. And on some buses like Metro Bus, plexiglass is also being installed. So this will further limit interaction in cases where you need to be in contact with the driver, or for people with disabilities or differing abilities who need to use the front doors in order to get on the bus. All of this has the added bonus of right now buses are free, since they're encouraging people to board through the rear doors. And so the VRE is doing quite a bit to help long distance commuters who need to return to work. Face masks are required, and they have enhanced cleaning at night and after their morning service. They have a really detailed section on the type of cleaner that they're using on their website, and they've added hand sanitizer stations on trains and at all VRE stations. For social distancing, they've also added graphics in all train cars and at the stations, which show you where you can sit and where you can't sit, where you can stand and where you shouldn't stand, to improve the distance between riders and make sure that even as people are coming back, they know which seats they can sit in and where is blocked off in order to improve distancing. One interesting element too is that they're also posting their ridership numbers per train on their website to help people make decisions about their personal safety for which train they board, so that they can flex their time if they need to get on a different train to improve their distance from other people. And VRE is one that has mentioned that they are looking into how they can provide real-time data on how many riders are on the train versus just the sort of more general data. And then for Capital BIKESHARE, to go ahead and move here. For Capital BIKESHARE, face masks are not specifically required, but you do want to be aware of the jurisdiction where you're using Capital BIKESHARE and their rules regarding face masks. The bikes are disinfected upon arrival at the depot, and vans that carry the bikes are also disinfected with every shift. Additionally, associates who handle the bikes have to wear gloves. I have a Capital BIKESHARE station on my street, and they have been taking the bikes away for cleaning more frequently, and the handlers are wearing masks and wearing gloves, as mentioned here, when they're handling them. And as far as social distancing goes, biking is a great way to get around while maintaining social distance. There are bikes all over the region, with more stations being added. And Arlington and DC now have the added bonus of they have the new e-bikes, which make biking even more accessible for people. And so just in case you're not familiar, ZIPCAR and Free to Move are car sharing services in our region. Car share allows people to pick up a car and rent it by the minute or by the hour for a variety of different kinds of trips, whether that is going to the grocery store, or you're running late for work, or you need to make a trip to another place during the workday. The key differences between the two services that are available in our region, with ZIPCAR, you have to return the vehicle to where you got it from. So you can't just use it to get to work and then end the trip there and stop paying. You'd have to return it back to where you got it from. But they do have a Monday through Friday pass available, and it is available across Northern Virginia. Whereas with Free to Move, they offer point-to-point car sharing by the minute or by the hour, so you can use it to commute and can end your trip where you need to. But right now, Free to Move is only available in Arlington and DC. Both of these services recommend that riders use face masks in the vehicle and have enhanced their cleaning and disinfecting protocols. It is still recommended, however, to wash your hands before and after using a car share service. And what's also really nice about car share is that it does allow you to ride solo or just with a group of people in your household to remain socially distanced, and can be a good option for employees who need to commute to the office for a few hours here or there, but don't necessarily feel comfortable with other options right now. And so then with your ride hailing services, which would include Uber, Lyft, and Via in this area, all providers are requiring riders to wear face masks, and a driver can deny a ride if you are not following protocol. And so CDC guidelines are shared with drivers, and with Lyft, and at least I believe now with Uber as well, drivers do have to certify what measures they're taking. Health and safety products have been made available to drivers now across all platforms in different ways. And if you take a ride in an Uber or a Lyft, you cannot sit in the front seat. Additionally, shared rides are suspended across all platforms. And this is really important to know here, because if your organization was one that did allow for your commuter benefits to be used on Uber and Lyft shared rides, employees won't be able to have this option likely when you start to return to the office. And so now that we've covered what measures regional transit is taking, we'll talk a little bit more about projects that are going on, so that if you've discovered something that you feel comfortable taking, or if you are planning for your return, you can get a better lay of the land. And so the first thing that I wanted to mention here is some changes to the summer metro shutdown on the Silver and Orange lines. As you may know, the Silver line closed in May 2020, and the reason for this was to connect the metro to the new Silver line Phase 2 stations that are going to take the metro on the Silver line out to Dulles, and that's planned to be completed next year. In addition to being closed due to this project, Greensboro Metro Station, McLean Metro Station, and East Falls Church Metro Stations were also not served by shuttles or by rail due to WMATA's response to COVID-19, but those did reopen to shuttle service only back in June. And so now the Silver Line METRORAIL service is going to be resuming, and shuttle buses will stop on August 16th. This brings Metro service back to Wheelie-Reston East, Spring Hill, Greensboro, Tysons Corner, and McLean Metro stations. The Orange Line stations west of Ballston have also been closed since May as part of WMATA's platform improvement project. So while Vienna, Dunloring, and East Falls Church will continue to be served by shuttle buses only, West Falls Church is going to reopen at the same time as the Silver Line stations on August 16th. As of right now, there's no delays that are being expected for the September 8th reopening date for the Orange Line. This does, however, mean that shuttle buses are going to change slightly. So beginning on August 16th, with the reopening of the Silver Line and West Falls Church Metro, the updated shuttle bus options are going to be the Orange Line Local, which is going to serve Vienna, Dunloring, and West Falls Church stations. The Orange Line Express, which will run directly between Vienna and West Falls Church with no intermediate stops. And then the East Falls Church to Ballston Express, which runs directly from East Falls Church to Ballston and vice versa. And so now if you are coming from the Silver Line to Ballston or from West Falls Church to Ballston or vice versa, trains will pass through East Falls East Falls Church Station, so you won't have to switch over to a shuttle bus, but they just won't stop at that station. So you won't need to get off of the metro, switch over to a shuttle bus, and then continue on to Ballston. You just won't be able to get off or on at East Falls Church Station. And so with all of this, we're also going to be seeing more metro and bus service returning. On August 16th, Metro will increase their weekday hours from 5 a.m. to 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. And during peak hours, trains are going to be running every 8 minutes or every 5 minutes on the red line. Additionally, off-peak, trains are going to be running every 15 minutes and every 12 minutes on the red line. And with all of this, Arlington Cemetery is still the only station that's remaining closed due to COVID-19. And then on August 23rd, Metrobus is going to start increasing their service. Weekday hours are going to be from 4 a.m. to midnight, and 174 routes are going to be operating on a close to normal schedule, which is an improvement over right now. Buses are largely on a Sunday schedule for all routes in Virginia. They haven't released exactly what this close to normal schedule looks like yet, but you can refer to Metro's trip planner or to Bus ETA to help if this impacts your commute, or you can always reach out to me and I can create a commute planner for you too. Rear door boarding will remain in effect as they continue to increase service, and so that means that buses will still remain free. And then along I-66 inside the Beltway, a new travel lane is being added. That's going to span 4 miles between the Dulles Connector Road and Fairfax Drive, exit 71, heading eastbound. Work is largely being conducted at night, so it shouldn't impact the commute too much. And you may have even heard of some of it going on right now with overnight ramp closures this week. So tonight and tomorrow night, the ramp from I-66 East to exit 69 at Washington Boulevard and Lee Highway is closed from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. And the new lane is still expected to open to traffic this fall. The project also does include some other really great improvements like the W&OD Trail Bridge that's going to be at Lee Highway and Fairfax Drive. That's also expected to be completed this fall. And then a new ramp being constructed to provide direct access to West Falls Church Metro Station expected later this year, and ongoing replacement and addition of noise barriers to reduce noise pollution. And so if you have a lot of people traveling in from outside the Beltway, work is continuing along I-66 from I-495 to Gainesville until late 2022. And once this work is complete, there are going to be 2 express lanes in both directions, in addition to 3 general purpose lanes and new park and ride lots, as well as room for future transit improvements and options that could be available. And so I'll touch on too, if you have a lot of employees who are coming from outside the Beltway, some additional resource for you there. But for now, so now that we've covered all of this information regarding the region, what does that mean for your return plans? So if you are currently still largely having employees telework and planning for an eventual return, the commute should be added into questions that you're adding into your feedback tools, how you're looking at and evaluating your facilities and existing programs or benefits, the policies that you implement, and in thinking about options. So if you haven't already, make sure that when you conduct a survey of employees, that questions about the commute are included in the survey. A few things that you'll want to gather from this at minimum include: when do employees feel comfortable returning to the commute? What modes of transportation did they use to get to work before? And how do they plan to commute when they return? Do they expect to telework more frequently long term? And what programs do they need to feel supported in the return? Asking questions like these can help act as your baseline and provide some ideas for your company to help determine if you're on the right track with timelines, how the way staff will use your facilities, benefits, and programs may change, and opportunities to help staff feel more comfortable in general with the return to the office. And so while service continues to slowly creep back, some bus routes and transit options are still not in operation right now. So take a look at what is directly around your office and identify if you do still have the same options right now. And if you're not sure about that, or if you're not sure what options were around you to begin with, that's something where we can certainly help. Additionally, do your leadership or planning teams feel comfortable with the measures that are being taken on local and regional transit? And if not, do you need to push back your timelines until they are? And if you have limited options, or if your employees or your leadership don't feel comfortable, what can be done to still support commuters if you do need to come back into the office quicker than you'd want to? And you'll want to take a hard look at your facilities and their capacity and limitations. So for parking, what did parking look like before the pandemic? Do you have room for everybody? Do you need to get creative to make sure that you could handle the increased demand? And how much control do you have over your parking, or how is it managed? And we'll go into some deeper examples with this later. And then with bike parking, some properties have proactively made their bike rooms incredibly welcoming to encourage new bike commuters coming back, since biking has really really increased during the pandemic. And so some examples of this include, adding a fix-it station or a bike lane leading into the bike room, or making sure that it has touchless access. But at the most basic level, you'll want to make sure that your bike room has enough capacity to handle new bicyclists, and also identify if people can bring bikes into the office if the bike room is full, or if people can't maintain social distancing while in the bike room. And so this is important because in a lot of leases, they do not allow you to take bikes into the office. So it is something to look at. And do you know the process for giving employees access to the bike room? Because you'll want to make sure that these kinds of information are shared with employees. And showers and lockers have been another really big topic that need to be thought through. Many people who are expecting to start biking, running, or walking are going to expect to be able to take a shower when they get to work if they've always had one available and maybe just never used it. But what we're seeing a lot of times is that showers might not necessarily be open. And so if your showers are going to be open, how are you going to ensure that people aren't gathering around and waiting to use it? This, I understand, may seem like a really odd consideration, but as a run commuter myself at an office where at points nearly everyone has biked, run, or walked to work, shower schedules are a real thing that can throw off everybody's day if it doesn't work correctly. This can cause employees to be late or to form and gather in lines outside of your shower or locker room. And as more people may be getting dropped off either by a family member, rideshare, or an Uber or a Lyft, how are you going to manage curb space at your building? Can you handle more drop-offs without it backing up into traffic or creating more trouble? And then when it comes to benefits, there's a few things that you'll want to take a look at. Additionally, if you're not already offering programs or benefits for these, you may need to evaluate if it would be useful to manage parking or to provide options for commuters. With commuter benefits or transit benefits, if you already have these in place but paused them during the pandemic, you'll need to reinstate them before transitioning back in. If you don't have them in place, there's a couple of reasons to still consider them. So as mentioned earlier, some people may be experiencing financial burdens during the pandemic, which would force them to look at ways that they could save on their commute, or could cause them to lose access to a vehicle. And commuter benefits can help put this money back into their pocket while also giving them access to an affordable option. Additionally, it's often forgotten that commuter benefits can also be used on van pool. And so if your company is having employees return, van pools can be a great option because employees would be commuting longer distances and from similar areas can form these little pods commuting every day with the same people who they're already working with, instead of taking transit for these long distances and being exposed to other people. We've already seen at least one group planning to return in 2021 who used to slug and is now transitioning to a van pool with other employees that they're going to be commuting with once the return happens. And so benefits for commuters who bike and walk are also a big topic of conversation right now. Again, with the heavy increase in biking during the pandemic, we're seeing some really interesting programs pop up around too, particularly with e-bikes. But a couple of really popular and more general programs are discounts on Capital BikeShare annual memberships, which now include the e-bikes in DC and Arlington, and providing a post-tax subsidy for employees who bike or walk the majority of their trip to work. So that's a really flexible one that we can help you design. And we'll talk about telework and scheduling a little bit more momentarily, but as mentioned early on, expect employees to expect these programs to continue in an expanded form. And so now is really the time to check in on how things are going with telework to help determine its future at your organization. And again, we'll touch on parking in a bigger way later, but what are you currently offering for parking? Will that serve you or hurt you in the return is the big question here. And there's a ton of flexible benefits or perks that you can offer to support commutes. These can include things like discounted car share memberships or rides, a guaranteed ride home program, in addition to the regional program that already exists, to provide employees with a taxi or a Lyft or an Uber ride in cases of emergencies, or if they come down with an illness but they took transit that day or something similar. Free e-scooter rides is another one that's recently popped up, and a closed carpool or van pool network for your employees, among some other different things. I would expect and hope to see more options pop up here, but these are just a few ways that companies are starting to get creative and support employees' commutes. And so what kind of company do you want to be when you return, and what kind of flexibility do you want to provide employees with? As part of your planning, if you haven't already, look at your flexible schedule policy and see if it matches, and if you'll need to create any type of short-term policy or agreement forms for this current situation. So some common types of scheduling that we're used to seeing are core hours, where everybody is working on site, who is working on site is expected to be at the office between certain hours, but the start and end times can be flexible. For example, core hours could be 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Flex time, where employees work out when they start and end their days, but it generally remains consistent. So for example, one employee may choose to start at 8, another employee may choose to start at 10 and work later. Compressed work weeks. So common forms here are a 980, where 80 hours are spread over a 2-week pay period with 9-hour days, 1 8-hour day, and 1 compressed day off, or a 410, where employees work 4 10-hour days per week. And then job sharing is where 2 employees work part-time to share 1 full-time job. This can support parents managing homeschooling or virtual learning, or help with companies who may be facing financial struggles to keep employees in some capacity still. And when you look at your flexible schedule policies, you'll need to decide if you'll be allowing for work in off hours. So for example, can parents have schedules that allow them to work nights and weekends? What policies do you have in place around tardiness, and do they need to be reevaluated to meet the current moment? And of course, the interaction with FLSA for non-exempt employees. And so many companies right now are reevaluating their telework policies and programs, and with good reason. As mentioned, while 70% of organizations offered some telework before COVID-19, this is likely to further increase. One thing that I really want to stress is that a lot of times companies will come to me and they say, oh, we're just really flexible, and so we don't have a formal policy because we don't need that type of documentation. And it never fails that when I do surveys with these companies, employees are least satisfied with their telework program. And this is because by not having a formal program, what that actually does is it leaves managers and employees without a clear point of reference, which can cause your telework program to lack transparency and be executed inequitably across different teams because so much is left up to discretion. So your policy should clearly indicate eligibility criteria, the types of telework that are allowed, meaning do you only allow for ad hoc or do you also provide recurring telework? And if so, how many days per week is the maximum allowable? It should also reflect the culture that you want to see. Do you want it to be open, or is it something that really is truly case by case? The language that you use matters. And make sure that it also reflects the processes that you have in place. A lot of times I'll talk to companies whose policies say that they require a bunch of forms, but none of them are being actually used, or vice versa. And so this is just a great time to look at it and just make sure that your policy actually matches your process. And a few potential needs as you evaluate your telework policy or incorporate feedback from employees, maybe creating updated agreements for temporary telework allowances if you haven't already had employees sign into these, creating documentation around eligibility. And so one thing that I will stress here is that whenever we hit the new normal, if there are going to be people on your team who will not be eligible for telework, it is going to be extra important to have documentation of these decisions and why they're being made, as more employees are going to be permitted to telework, and employees who aren't may feel slighted, and it may create some sort of tension. And so you'll need to have documentation that easily explains and backs managers up as to why these decisions exist. And finally, through surveying employees and through creating updates in your policies or in evaluating telework as a whole, you may find it to be a great time to provide employees and managers with training around your telework policy to further create transparency, as well as promote its equitable implementation across different teams, or to resolve issues that you've started to notice as we've been working remotely for so long that may have come up around technology or around other processes. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop here because we have a quick poll. All right, so the poll question is, so now that we have discussed some planning elements here, what are you most concerned with for your return plan? So these can refer to those that you foresee your staff or coworkers having, or those that you as a decision maker have implementing with new programs. And I'll leave this open for a couple of minutes. All right. About 10 more seconds. All right, and so we have some great responses here. So we're seeing that 50% of people are most concerned about transit availability and safety, and then followed by flexible work policies around scheduling and telework, and traffic congestion, with just about 10% of people being concerned about parking availability. And so, yeah, this has been sort of echoed by, I think what I've been seeing and talking to a lot of companies about is what is transit going to look like, and how do we feel safe as companies getting employees back on it, or providing additional options if we don't feel comfortable with people taking transit, or if they don't feel comfortable themselves. So it's great. All right, and so then we've done all this planning, and so what are the best ways to communicate with employees to share options about the return? So first, let's look at what we would need to communicate. So you'll want to cover any policy or program changes, no matter how small, even if it is just saying, we don't care if you're late right now because of a commute issue. Because when you communicate these things, a lot of people, it may seem like common sense, but they may not know that it's okay. And so provide resources to employees that share what options look like ahead of their return to help them feel more supported, and communicate all related benefit or amenity enrollment forms and related deadlines in their processes to help people who need to change their allocations do so. It's been said before, but with all things returning to work, communicating and over communicating is extremely important. So you want to share information at all levels and really in multiple different formats to improve the employee experience and help people feel secure. And so there's a lot of different ways that you can make sharing this information more engaging for employees and help them to be active participants in it. So some ideas include, as mentioned before, providing training for managers on any new policies or on how to engage their hybrid team when some people return and some people don't, which can pose some more challenges. And then also posting a presentation, providing commute options for employees who are returning. We've seen some companies set up sort of like a monthly presentation that talks about what transit is doing, what transit options are available as they start to bring employees back into the office. And then you can also, we have open enrollment coming up, so hosting a virtual benefits fair is a great idea. Or maybe if you are working with a variety of different vendors on the return to work, having them participate in a virtual event that shares what their return will look like and how these different companies have helped to set your company up for success in the return. And so now it is the moment of truth. You've done all of this planning. You have communicated absolutely everything that you can. What happens when people actually start to return? And so the big message here is to be prepared. No one has been through this before, and so things are going to come up that pose really unexpected challenges. A few things that may be realistic include hearing from employees about concerns with traffic. Since we've learned to live in this sort of traffic-free oasis over the past few months, it's going to feel extra painful when traffic creeps back up. So you may certainly leave it to the employee to figure out, but it's good to have a few resources on hand that can give employees some different options. And if you return and then a spike in cases happens, how is this going to be handled? So hopefully, obviously, right now we're all in a better place in terms of being able to handle this. But look at how your company had to react the last time and identify what could be improved if you had to do it all over again. Telework should be incorporated in your emergency preparedness plans if it isn't already, and it is always, if nothing else, a great business continuity strategy. And a parking shortage can certainly be harmful, especially if you can't just build more parking. And so parking is something that it's best to be really proactive about because it can be extremely difficult to manage once it is out of control. As mentioned, we expect for there to be an increased demand for parking, and it's a huge consideration for companies across the nation right now. If you did have limited parking before COVID-19, returning may bring this out to the forefront. And many of the programs discussed earlier in this webinar can help to curb that issue, such as commuter benefits or benefits for people who bike and walk, but some severe cases may involve a bit more management. And so one thing that we're seeing more of is creating a charge for parking daily rather than monthly to ensure that parking is not a sunk cost and create the mindset that employees have a daily choice in how they commute to work. And having to pay for parking each day they use it helps employees to realize the true cost of parking and can encourage the use of other modes. And right now too, since employees may not be commuting every day, this helps them only pay when they need it. And you can also look at providing a parking cash out. This is a one-time or a monthly stipend to employees who give up their parking space. Offering a cash out like this can help employees rethink their commute a little bit and determine if they want to continue parking or if they're going to take the cash out and spend it in another way that better suits them. And you can also determine what preferred modes you have or you want employees to engage with and create an incentive for employees each day they commute in this manner. This frees up parking for those who really need it while still creating a daily choice in how employees get around. And then a really simple way to curb parking demand is to simply have employees pay for parking. The 2019 State of the Commute report shows that when employees in our region had free parking at work, 83% of them drove alone. But when employees did not have access to free parking at their work site, only 36% of them drove themselves to work. And so I recognize that right now too, you may not want to heavily incentivize or disincentivize certain types of commutes, and that is absolutely valid. But these are just in those really severe cases where you know that you don't have enough parking and you can't afford to build or rent another garage. And then, as mentioned earlier, there are lots of different ways that you can support employees. But if you return and you realize that something's missing within your program, we're continuing to see a lot of new options pop up from vendors that we work with. And so a few different things right now include on-demand ride sharing in a closed system for your employees. And this would have that has a dedicated or can have a dedicated driver to allow for a convenient option that has contact tracing and a bunch of different data available for you and can help, and you can set a bunch of perimeters around it. As mentioned, we're likely going to be continuing to see more reservation-based systems related to commuter programs for shuttles and for parking on a daily basis. And then bike and e-bike fleets where employers can either lease or outright purchase a number of bikes or e-bikes to provide on hand to employees. And these can be used for commuting, so you can loan them to commuters, or they can be kept at the office for workday trips or a combination of the two. And so now I want to share a few resources available to your company as you move forward with your plans. So as your free consultant and for being located in the region, if there are areas that we discussed today where you were thinking to yourself, that sounds really interesting, but like a ton of work, or how would we even get started with that? That's what I'm here for. Whether it's creating surveys, talking through your current programs and identifying some potential gaps or opportunities, helping you prepare for potential parking challenges and mitigate them before they would happen, creating custom resources to be shared with employees to share these transit options and what the different providers across the region are doing. Or if you just want a second pair of eyes on a new policy. These are all things that we can help you with to create the kind of future that you want to see at your organization and support employees commuting or not commuting to work. And also by attending this webinar, you will also receive our brand new guide that is relating to a successful return to the office and includes a bunch of sample policies, survey questions, sample email communications, and a slew of other information to support you in your role in your organization's return. And then last but not least, so we also work with regional jurisdictions and partner programs across the region. So typically every jurisdiction has a similar organization that can provide commuter support to further help make this transition easy for your company. So if you're in Arlington, that would be Arlington Transportation Partners or ATP. Reston or out towards Dulles is the Dulles Area Transportation Association or DATA. Fairfax offers an employer services program where employees can also get a $50 Smart Trip card through their Smart Benefits Plus 50 program. Go Alex for Alexandria. And then also while I work inside the Beltway, there's a group that helps with programs for companies outside the Beltway to share resources and incentives and further updates regarding that construction. And finally, Tyson's partnership for companies out in Tyson's. And so if you haven't met with your local group before, it's a great resource to know about and to meet with at least once. And so if you would like to be connected with them but don't know who to reach out to, then I can certainly help to connect you there as well. And so I hope that this information has been really helpful as you start to look at what returning to the office means and where the commute comes into play. And so if you can't stick around for questions, there will be a survey link that will be posted in the questions box so that you can provide your feedback. And then hope to hear from you that way, or I'm going to leave my contact information here as well to reach out. And if you have questions, you can go ahead and start posting them in the questions box. All right, so we do have a few questions here. And so let's see. The first question is, I take METRORAIL from Navy Yard and I still see a lot of people on the trains that are not wearing face coverings. Yeah, and so this is something that I can certainly understand would be a fear for people in getting on the metro. And the one thing that I can say to this is that I think that we'll continue to see some more promotion around masks and potentially some more enforcement around it. But keep your own personal safety in mind when you are choosing different commuting options, and recognize that you can't control everybody else's actions, but you can control your own. And then another question asks about what will Metro's subway do when and if all government employees are asked to come back in. It is hard to socially distance when people are on the metro and the buses. And so one thing that I really want to say about this is how government is returning to the office is also based on how much metro service is being made available. And so, like I mentioned earlier with Metro's plans, they plan to increase service before people actually start returning to the office. And that's part of why we're starting to see more people and more companies not returning to the office until 2021. But right now, Metro is starting to increase their service so that they are prepared for that, and as companies do start that return. Another question does ask about Metro funding, and there is going to, Metro has been looking at a bunch of different funding options. I'm not necessarily sure as far as contributions from Virginia and Maryland, but those have continued. For slugging, another question asked about slugging and if slugging is being discouraged currently due to social distancing requirements. So it really depends. And so slugging, actually a recent survey was done that showed by sluglines.com that was posted out to a group who I had demonstrated either previous interest in slugging or had previously slugged prior to the pandemic. And that survey actually showed that a lot of people felt either just as comfortable slugging or more comfortable slugging. And I think that this is because, well, if we think about it from an I-66 standpoint, you only have to have one other person in your car. And so that person can sit in the back. And then I think that some people who live farther out may think of it more as just like if you would feel comfortable getting in an Uber or a Lyft. And so it's less people. However, obviously, you don't necessarily know who you're getting into the car with and what precautions they're taking or if they have cleaned their car. So while it's not necessarily being discouraged, and it really depends on the employer or on the jurisdiction and as to how they handle that, we have seen some interest in slugging continue. Yes, and so another statement is indicates that the guidance I have from OPM is that they are still encouraging teleworking for those that do not feel comfortable with coming back during phase 2, and agreed with this. They, as of right now, the last bit that we had heard was that as far as the Pentagon goes, they still have less than 50% of their staff commuting in. And so with this, I think that it's still going to be a while before we see the federal government coming back in a larger way. All right. Does anybody else have any other questions right now? I'll leave this open for about 1 to 2 other minutes. And but if you need to hop off, you have my contact information. If there's anything else that you need, please don't hesitate to reach out, or any questions that I didn't answer for you today. And then, as mentioned too, everybody who attended will be receiving a copy of the guide. Thank you so much. One other question asked, and this is an important question, is if there will be a real-time app available showing occupancy on shuttles, buses, and trains. I have not been able to find out any information about this on if this is on WMATA's plans at all. However, the VRE is looking into this. And so I think that this is an area where we will hopefully see future innovation. It depends on how much data WMATA is willing to share. And it also depends on if this is a priority focus for them. There have been other things that they are focusing on, such as touchless payment options for buses and for trains. And so I think that that might be where their focus is right now, is on providing that. All right, well, great. Well, thank you guys again for joining today. And I, again, really appreciate all of the participation and the questions, and please don't hesitate to reach out. And at this time, I will go ahead and close down the webinar. Thank you.